And tonight we thought that we would devote the hour to a kind of follow-up discussion or reception, if you like, in the form of a short interview segment and just sort of panel discussion with our three guests for the evening. And then we'd actually like to open it up to audience questions. And I do know, I can see in the audience, there are many other people here who have also been involved in this event. And so I'd really just like to encourage everyone to be involved in the discussion. As we work through the first part of tonight, we'll just be asking some questions and generating some discussion among the panelists, but and then we'll open it up to the audience. And as usual, you'll be coming in tonight muted, but when we get to the point where we're ready to open it up to the audience, we'll just invite you to obviously use the chat function if you like. You can use the raise hand function, and Tom and I will be monitoring that and do our best to work through the questions and the comments that people might have. So thank you very much for coming tonight. So we're really happy to be welcoming Peter North, Dana Wylie, and Maria Dunn this evening, our panelists, to talk a little bit about the history of this event, as well as folk music in general in Edmonton. Peter North is a journalist in print, radio, and television as a promoter of live music, including the regional and national roots music scene. For 22 years, he's written for major print publications in Edmonton, including 10 years covering folk, blues, bluegrass, and country music for the Edmonton Journal. His pieces have also been featured in regional and national magazines, as well as liner notes for dozens of albums. He's co-produced Country Beat on the CBC for 6 years. He scouted for talent for Sun Country on CTV for several years. His efforts have been recognized nationally. He was named Music Journalist of the Year in 1996 at the annual Canadian Music Industry Awards, and Media Person of the Year 6 years in a row, awarded by the Western Canadian Music Association. I know he's involved in dozens of other projects, including being one of the first programmers and founders of the Winter Roots Festival, including the Women of Folkways event that we'll be discussing this evening. I've only read a portion of his bio, and so I'll stop here and just ask you to please welcome Peter North this evening. And in addition, we have Maria Dunn and Dana Wylie, both of whom performed on Saturday night, and both have been involved in this event and curating Winter Roots Roundup as well. Maria Dunn is a true preserver of the spirit of folk music, twice Juno nominated, and is often compared to Woody Guthrie for her keen social awareness and unvarnished melodic songs about ordinary people. Her new album, Joyful Blazing in 2021 celebrates resilience, grace, gratitude, solidarity, joy, and the love that fires our actions to make the world a better place. And there it is, you can see on the screen there. Dana Wylie is a musician and theater artist whose original work is rootsy, spacious, thought-provoking, and essentially joyful. Her fifth and latest album, The Earth That You Are Made Of, garnered her Canadian Folk Music Award nomination for Contemporary Singer of the Year, and her work in theater as an actor, singer, writer, and musical director has earned her 4 Sterling Award nominations. She's also the immeasurably proud and generally overwhelmed mother of an 8-year-old Anna and 2-year-old Grayson. Her 6th album, How Much Muscle, will be released sometime amid the craziness of 2021, and I hope you'll all check that out. I just listened to her last album the other day on a walk, and it's fantastic. Her theatrical song cycle, Makings of a Voice, will debut digitally at the Skirts Fire Festival in March. So I'd also like you to welcome Maria Dunn and Dana Wylie. And I've also asked Tom Merklinger and Oliver Rossier, who work with me at the Sound Studies Institute, to join me this evening, just to toggle back and forth between questions and just to kind of move the discussion along, and they'll think of things that I don't, and I'm just happy to welcome them. So welcome to Tom and Oliver. Okay, so gosh, and it's great to see everybody. I would suggest also this evening Perhaps one way to experience this, if you're on the Zoom call rather than the YouTube stream, is to perhaps put your view in the grid view, because again, this event tonight is not necessarily about just one person. It's about the collective of all of us, talking about these great events, and in particular, the event on Saturday night, but also the future of Women of Folkways and the Winter Roots Roundup. So I think maybe what we'll do to start off this evening is we have a few questions for Peter. And Peter, we did send a few of the questions ahead of time to our panelists, but we're also going to have some spontaneous discussion as well. So some other questions may come out. One of the questions that we definitely wanted to ask Peter about, as one of the founders of Women of Folkways, along with, I think, Joan Greer and Lorna Arndt and some others. Congratulations, by the way, on 12 consecutive years of this event, and of celebrating these artists. And I just wondered, maybe we can start with Peter to talk a little bit about the original motivations for the Winter Roots Roundup and also the Women of Folkways part of that. And I'm also happy to have you sort of talk about that within the context of your own biography as a journalist and a lover of folk music. And you could tell us a little bit about how you got into that to begin with. And so I'll just turn it over to you. Thanks. I think, Peter, I think you're still muted. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, there we go.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for the nice introduction. And it's great to see so many names of so many people I really love and like showing up this evening. Yeah, Winter Roots is called Winter Roots Roundup, and originally, and it sort of just started on a whim. Lorna was running FolkwaysAlive, doing a great job administering it, and we had done a couple of concerts together over the years. And one Saturday in January, whatever year it was, I got two calls from agents, one from Alvin Youngblood Hart's agent and one from Mark Hummel's agent, a great harmonica player in San Francisco, and they both wanted gigs on the same weekend towards the end of February. And I thought, well, maybe this is a way we could start having a winter sort of festival involving roots music. And I phoned Lorna, and so we met, and it didn't take us long to realize, yeah, we could stitch something together. I mean, to be honest with you, we never had much in the way of a budget in a lot of ways, but we really wanted to do it. And we signed both of those acts and a few others and came up with some theme shows. And we got through the first year. Lorna Thomas put together a wonderful short film on Pete Seeger. We show it down at the old media club, which I think by then was the Fiddler's Roost. And David Ray, a great guitar player, had played with Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Gordon Lightfoot and numerous other folk heroes, was there along with Terry McDade and Byron Meyer, and they played a lot of Mike Seeger's music and music that he was passing on. And we used the blue chair, as I recall. That was very nice of Harold. And we used the Newcastle pub out in Otwell Shopping Center for an evening of blues. The theme was, as I recall, Chess Records, Muddy Waters, and Willie Dixon. So we stitched together some things, and we got good crowds and a good response. I mean, we weren't trying to fill huge rooms. And when it was all said and done, we decided, yeah, we can do a second year, and let's go try and get some money and work. We got 12 months to work with instead of 36 days or whatever we had. And the second year, I remember we were sitting in Lorna's office, and when you look at the Folkways collection, the women's component really jumps out at you, and you combine that with the Folkways Smithsonian output, and it just seemed obvious that a Women of Folkways workshop or concert would be pretty strong addition to the programming. And I mean, Maria's name was boom. It was the first name for both of us, almost simultaneously said, well, let's get Maria involved with this. And fortunately for us, Maria was really interested. And for the second year of programming, we did a Women of Folkways evening, and I believe it was at the Yardbird. Tell me if I'm wrong, Maria, but is that right? Yeah. And we did a couple of years of programming at the Yardbird on Thursday nights because they weren't programming anything at the time. And that was a superb venue. And so we just rolled with it, you know. I mean, I have a list here of some, you know, the great talent that we had over the years. We ended up doing it at Festival Place too. Gavin Farmer reached out to us and wanted to help us produce some shows there. And that was great for main concerts. Unfortunately, didn't work quite as well in Sherwood Park for workshops, but you know, you roll with it. Del Rey from Seattle, Lizzie Hoyt, Laura Vinson, Kara Luft, Cat Dancer, Joan Besson from Prairie Oyster, Dana and Maria, of course, Cindy Church, Shannon Johnson, and Rosalie Sorrells, who unfortunately didn't make Rosalie, you know, the icon that she is. She unfortunately, I think it was the third year, or maybe it was the second year, she forgot her passport leaving from Idaho to Seattle. And she had to have somebody ship her passport to the airport or something. I forget how it works. So she missed her first night, but we did get to see Rosalie a couple of nights after that. So that's what happened. And that's how it came about. And yeah, very responsive. I remember the press was great. Maria was great as a host and incredible in tying everybody together and getting everybody on the same page. And away we went. And here it is. Hard to believe, as you say, 12 years later.
And I'd like to either Dana or Maria to pipe in if you'd like to add anything to that, because I know that both of you have also been involved really since the beginning. And you know, maybe a follow-up question, you know, might be, well, I think in some ways Peter has already spoken to some of the biggest challenges, the funding challenges, but you know, perhaps one thing I'm interested in is how this event sort of relates to the larger kind of folk music scene in Edmonton, and also the Folk Music Festival, which has grown to such an extent that and changed a lot in some ways. I mean, I know that a lot of people talk about how sometimes it seems like a lot of these larger folk music festivals have kind of expanded, you know, the definition of folk music and out in a lot of ways, and that the event maybe you know, maybe doesn't often offer some local musicians as much as much room as visiting musicians. So anyway, just curious about your thoughts about the history of the event and its relationship to the larger folk music community in Edmonton.
Well, I just have to add to what Peter said. And Tom, tell me if I'm not loud enough. I've been screwing around with the microphones and forgetting to turn things on. So,
You sound good.
okay, thanks. That first year that Peter and Lorna Arndt invited me to be involved, Cat Dancer was the host, and I was so excited. I remember coming off the stage at the intermission, and just Peter was standing there, and I just said, I'm pretty sure I jumped straight up and down and said, I love this. I want to do it again anytime you ever want me to do it again. So for me, I was a volunteer DJ folk nerd at CJSR for many years. In fact, that's where I very first met Peter North. He very kindly guided me through one of my early shaking in my boots segments on air. And so I love the idea of being able to marry everything I loved about being a DJ and researching music and connecting music together across different time periods and across oceans. I loved that aspect of it. And for 11, 12 years at that point, I hadn't had a radio show anymore, and you know, was playing music full time. And so this was finally an opportunity for me to kind of marry those two aspects of music that I've always absolutely loved. Also thinking back to that first night, Cat Dancer hosted, Lizzie Hoyt played. Rosalie wasn't able to make it, so Freebo filled in at the last minute, and I believe that we dubbed him Man Enough to be a Woman of Folkways. that very first year. So
I remember that, and that was I was not involved with Women of Folkways from early on, but I was in the audience that year, and there was something so special about Freebo being there, and that and I still remember you coining that phrase too, "Man enough to be a woman of folkways." That was such a special night. It was so magic.
And for those who don't know, Freebo was Bonnie Raitt's bass player for probably the first decade of her recording career. And he's a great bass player, but also a great tuba player. And he turns up to this day on a lot of records playing tuba once in a while, making cameos. But yeah, he had a lot of fun. And it was nice of him to step into the breach.
as a DJ at CJSR, I had been vaguely aware of Folkways. I think someone had started to do a Folkways show once a week. But it was definitely Peter inviting me to be part of this, and Lorna, and pulling me into this fold that made me really aware of this amazing resource. And then I remember going into the Folkways office for the first time and listening to some of those records that really inspired me. And many I was familiar with through having them in the CJSR library, having them at Edmonton's public library. Songs that I grew up with that my dad sang as part of the skiffle craze that he learned from Josh White, that I then found on Bill Brunzi's records in Smithsonian Folkways. Yeah, just so many connections for me.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I just in my this is my first year as the director of the institute, and as I've gotten to know the catalog and its just vastness, I'm just constantly amazed at just how much material there is, and obviously it's a collection that includes a lot more than folk music, but folk music is the main kind of bread and butter of the label, and it's just so much there. And one thing that was really wonderful for me about the event on Saturday, and beginning to understand something about the ethos of the event, was hearing each of you singing, one of your favorite songs from the collection or from one of the artists who've been inspirational, but then also singing one of your own original songs, which was just so fun to hear. And that makes me wonder just a little bit if you could maybe talk a little bit, anybody, any of you, about the continuing tradition of performance in folk music, and how important it is to mentor young artists who are writing their own songs. So I'm just wondering about, how do you strike a balance between honoring these great musicians and then also mentoring people in creating their own pieces and continuing this great tradition?
Dana.
Oh gosh, that that's a big question. I think with regard to the balance between original work and the folk music tradition, I think one thing for me, that as someone who came into music as a songwriter, I was an actor before and I was in theater, and then I started writing songs. And it was a few years after that, when I moved to England, that I got involved with folk music, because I just happened to be part of a group of friends who were really, really inspired by the folk revival that had happened there in the 60s. And we're a big part of all of the folk clubs that are now still flourishing from the seeds that were planted at that time. And so folk music as a tradition and as a part of people's lives, that something people would go to concerts and see their heroes, who were also just like regular folks, like like all of the English folk icons, like all of their names are escaping me now, like Martin Simpson and people like that. They're all just like, you go to their gigs at the folk clubs, they're just like regular people. And that kind of feeds into how many of the folk clubs in England as well, they'll have a featured performer who's one of those greats, and then the floor will be open for part of it too. So it was all tied into participatory music making, as well as these people who did it at such a high level. And so when I came back, I was actually a student at the university too, so I came to know the Folkways catalog as a student and as a researcher, as well as a musician. And the gift for me has always been, as someone who I think, unlike Maria, I think your work is so you're as it says in your bio, you're it's like you've taken a torch from Woody Guthrie, and I think my music is less directly influenced by many of those folk sounds, but the ethos of it has completely changed the way that I would do music, and also to the way that I have lived my life too, because I think, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I think one of the gifts of the Folkways catalog, and Mo Asch's goal to just get everything down. He didn't have any. There were no commercial interests in terms of why he did what he did and why he wanted to record what he wanted to record. And so what that means is that we now have a history, a much more open history of music and music making than we would have if we just had commercial recordings to work with. And that discovering the women who are covered in that catalog, who most people don't know who they are, and our music histories have erased them, but they're in the Folkways catalog. So for me, that's like, that it is an enduring, I don't even know what, that's just an enduring underlying sort of quest that carries so many facets of my life. But with regard to how it ties into the music making, one beautiful thing about having access to such a rich catalog like the Folkways catalog is that, for one thing, if you're experiencing a drought as a songwriter, there's nothing more inspiring than just going into the tradition and seeping yourself into it and learning songs from it. And I guess so then with regard to mentoring young people as well, I would certainly tell any young musician, like, go, like, just swim around in all that stuff, learn the songs and learn about the people too, because that's such a big part of it.
I mean, I'd like to say that we live in a strong folk community here in Edmonton compared to a lot of centers. Think about the two women we have on this panel tonight, and artists like Scott Cook, Braden Gates, and Kat Dancer. I mean, there is a strong folk tradition here, but I think what concerns me the most is where do you hear this music, and where does it find a place? The world's a lot different than 40 years ago. I was just going through, I've been a pack rat, a relatively organized pack rat for a long time, but I've been going through a lot of memorabilia, and I came across a number of calendars for the Havel Folk Club from the 70s in an envelope just last week. And the place was open 30 nights a month. I mean, it was open every night. And there were not only the folk singers that we knew in our own community who were doing well. There was, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and Johnny Shines and Bob Carpenter from Toronto. But the word folk implies what it's all about. And the Havel was a folk club, and it was for folks singing about folks. And my big concern these days is, never have we seen such a tsunami. And I like pop music to a certain degree. I mean, certainly, we all have our tastes, but the tsunami of pop culture right now is just so overwhelming for everything. It's hard to find a space. I'm really concerned. We think, and rightfully so, we think in this city that the Edmonton Folk Festival is a big event, because it is. But what I discovered a few years doing Winter Roots was we would take music into a couple of schools, and if you were over say at Austin O'Brien, which is in the core of the city, most of the kids in those classes knew what the Folk Fest was because they lived within a stone's throw of it. But we'd go out to deep South Edmonton, and there was a lot of kids in high school had no idea what we were talking about. What's the Folk Festival? I mean, just a blank look. And so it's great to introduce them to it. And they were excited to hear the people that we brought into the schools. But it's a concern that, stuff is sort of fading to black, and thank God for Northern Lights. And good evening, Betty, Joe, and Bill, and, the other folk promoters we have, because it's not an easy easy road right now. And Dana mentioned Martin Simpson, and or Maria, one of you just mentioned, Dana did. And I had Martin Simpson booked at the Salmon Arm Roots and Blues Festival 3 years ago, I believe. I mean, the man's absolutely brilliant. I mean, he's right up there, he's like Richard Thompson to me, it's right there. And I put him on main stage on Saturday night, second up. And he came off stage and he said, we're yakking. And he said, that's the first time I've been on a main stage in Canada in a decade. Because he's solo. And it's Bruce Coburn gets those slots sometimes, but very few artists get that. And he had the audience in the palm of his hand once they sort of, brought, because I think we went from up here with a New Orleans band and then brought it down because it's supposed to be a journey. And then all of a sudden people are getting it. But that kind of thing is sort of going by the board unless you're at smaller, great festivals like Canmore or something, it's a tough game right now for folk artists, I'd say.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That actually makes me wonder, a question I'm wondering about for me and maybe some others who I'm ashamed to say I've never been to a Winter Roots Roundup until this year. And of course, this year, the event was mostly just what I see discussed as kind of the signature event of Winter Roots Roundup, the Women of Folkways concert. And so I'm curious if maybe you could talk a little bit about what a normal Winter Roots Roundup really looks like. What are all the components that are normally a part of the larger festival?
Well, Winter Roots in its initial inception doesn't exist anymore unless I missed something. It's sort of, when I took on the job at Salmon Arm and Lorna was leaving, and then Joan came in, and Joan and I did some work and got through some things, but there was a shift with what happened with Folkways Alive, of course. So what was great was that Northern Lights picked up the Women of Folkways and kept that part of it alive. But the components we had a really, as I mentioned, we had a really good film component, I thought. And a lot of thematic shows. I mean, one of the shows I remember, events that I really loved was on a Saturday morning at Expressions Cafe over on 70th Ave and 99th Street. We did a workshop on vintage instruments, and we had John Rutherford from Calgary, Byron Meyer, of course, from Meyer's Music, and Banana, aka Lowell Levenger, who was in a band in the 60s and 70s called the Youngbloods. And he has been selling and collecting vintage acoustic instruments for like 50 years. So this, you sort of wonder at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, are people going to go for brunch? Or are they going to end? I remember my daughter phoned me because I was just getting off air at CKUA, and she said, "You won't believe it, Dad. It's standing room only in here, and we're still 40 minutes away from," and people had great questions, and they had instruments with them that they wanted, Banana to see, and they all had great stories about finding particular instruments and who the makers of certain instruments in certain areas were. So those kind of things are, that's stuff I like. And apparently there were some like-minded people out there too. It's about information, about informing yourself. And everything that's hip and great just didn't happen yesterday or this afternoon at 4 o'clock. It's been a wonderful world for a long time. And just to investigate where all this music comes from and what shapes it and how many people are involved in making it, even if they're not players, if they're luthiers, whatever. So, there's things like that, interview sessions. I remember Cam Hayden did a great interview with Jim Kweskin. We had a film on jug band music, and Jim was one of the great disciples of that with the Jim Kweskin jug band back in the 60s, came up from the States and gave us a fascinating insight to the scene in New York and Boston and all those places in the 60s where the folk boom happened. So
I'll just throw in here that in the Well, the first year that I programmed Women of Folkways, I was actually working as a student. It was a student position as a programmer for, I think, what was still Folkways Alive, but was in the process of transitioning into sound studies. And we really tried. We had very little money, but we really we knew that there was a legacy of this well-rounded event that had all these different, that, you know, not only several musical events, but as Peter was saying, film, and that was sort of multidisciplinary. And we really wanted to try to keep as much of that as possible with basically no money. So there's something that comes to mind, is that first year that I programmed it. Linda McRae, who's with us today, because she ended up coming up to do Women of Folkways. I learned that Linda does this amazing thing where she goes into various kinds of institutions where you know, people made marginalized and vulnerable people are, like prisons and places like that, and she does writing workshops with people. So one of the things we were able to do with Linda was, you know, just get in touch with, I think it ended up being the Bissell Center and Boyle Street Community Services, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, it was one of the women's shelters actually. And so yeah, Linda went in and did two workshops in these places, and it was I think I mean, it would be actually great for Linda to pipe up and talk about how that experience was for her right now, but I don't think it went how she expected, but it was really, really beautiful. And the people whose lives she came into that day were transformed. The work she did was amazing. So that was one thing that we were able to do that was supplemental that year. Do you want to talk about that, Linda? Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It was a really incredible experience. Both places were across the street from each other. I remember one of them was downstairs in kind of a rec room sort of place, and it was kind of well, I think both of them were sort of drop-in centers, and it was so interesting. Some of the people were really engaged and other people were just kind of walking around, and, you know, but it was really fun. And then when we went across the street, it was kind of like a soup kitchen. I think there were people eating and everything, and it was freezing outside at the time. I remember, you know, crossing the street with all our gear and everything and taking it over to the other place, and it was absolutely freezing. But you know, I played a little bit, and I remember this one man came over to me and he wanted to thank me somehow, and gave me an original piece of art that was done on a deer skin. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was just, and that I still have that. I mean, you know, it was incredibly moving. It was a beautiful picture. But those workshops, I've learned so much in them, working with disenfranchised people and kids too. We worked a lot with at-risk youth, and you know, pulling out my accordion. I just love playing songs for them on the accordion, because most of them have never seen anything like that before. And when they actually hear it, it reminds them of their grandparents, or, you know, someone that's they've heard the music before, and then other ones that have never heard it before. Just like their eyes are like saucers. It's just the greatest things. And when you see them lighting up because of the music, and then they write something that surprises themselves, they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wrote that, you know. So it's a really wonderful experience. And thank you for having me for that festival, and Betty Jo and Bill too. It was a really great time. We had a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed the one on Saturday night too. So thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And yeah, to just say one more thing about those workshops too, is that I remember that when you, at the beginning of the workshop, when you pulled out your accordion and did a couple of songs to sort of, you know, just get people feeling comfortable, and you know, to make yourself vulnerable too. And I it was amazing witnessing how that opened people up.
Yeah, I mean, music is such a powerful thing. I mean, you know, it's a whole other language, and it reaches people where a lot of other things don't, you know. So it's such an incredible way, means of expression. And you know, I totally understand what Peter's saying. It's really nice to see you, Peter. It's been a little while, but you know, the whole folk scene, I mean, I'm really worried right now too because of COVID and all the venues, and you know, they're shutting down left and right. So, you know, I've been doing a show trying to help support my fellow venues and fellow artists and things, trying to, you know, just take in donations and sharing it with them and things like that. But there's a Folk Alliance music conference is happening right now, and I've been doing a bunch of stuff with that as well, and that's kind of wonderful to see. There, I don't know what the registration is like right now, but the whole thing is online, and they made it you know, very inexpensive for people to attend. And there's a lot of people at the panels that I've, you know, been on, and the different shows in the evening. So that's really great to see. I love folk music so much. You know, I kind of came into it late in life because I kind of grew up more from in a rock and roll background, you know, not heavy metal, but more heavier music. And then the banjo really introduced me to a lot of folk music, you know, so I kind of came by it late in life, but oh boy, it really got its hooks in me.
Well, I first heard Linda McRae for the very first time playing accordion with Spirit of the West, who was a huge band in terms of my influence in music, and marrying again that punk rock energy that the Pogues and the Oyster Band had. And then we had our own Canadian version of that, Spirit of the West, with actual songs about life in Canada and life in the Vancouver area. And, you know, what a stellar band. And I just remember Linda just rocking the Dinwiddie stage with her accordion on those jigs and reels. It was just phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had such a great time, you know, getting to play. I mean, that first year I joined the band, we played Edmonton and Winnipeg and Vancouver and, you know, all the folk festivals. And it was just, I'm really grateful to have had that experience in my life, you know. It was a lot of fun. I met a lot of really wonderful people and learned a lot. I learned a lot about songwriting. You know, and going some of the tours that we did, going to the UK and just going into some little pub. And I remember this one place we went in Edinburgh, and there were fellows there from oh God, that just their name just went right out of my head. Who's that great big Celtic band?
Runrig.
No.
Nope.
Older than that.
Battlefield Band.
No, oh no, they're friends of ours too. But oh my God, I can't believe it. My brain's just like Swiss cheese.
Silly
right now.
Wizard.
No. It was a traditional Celtic band. Oh, anyway, they were all in the corner of this pub that we were sitting at. They're famous people, and like their names just got right out of my head. I know you know them if I can remember the name, but you know, just going into a place like that and seeing these people sitting in the corner and you know, oh, it was just amazing. Getting to play the Shetland Island Folk Festival with Catherine DeCowell playing out Northumberland pipe. I remember going to a show in Toronto where they had an Uilleann pipe concert. It was all different, you know, people that were just learning how to play up until people that were experts on it. And it was the most interesting and fun thing. It was wonderful. So yeah, I'm just really grateful to have had that background. And it's funny because a lot of the old time music didn't really enter into that. That was more of the Celtic background. And then I discovered, you know, Doc Boggs and Gene Ritchie and Ola Bell Reed and all these different people, you know, and sort of a lot of the stuff from the Folkways tradition. And that literally changed my whole musical lexicon. Like I just got immersed in it. When I got in touch with Gene Ritchie, as I mentioned on Saturday night, I ordered everything she had on her website. I think I spent like $400 or something. You know, I bought every video, every CD, everything she had, you know, and it was just like, oh man, it's just so great. So yeah, It's really important to try and pass the music down. We definitely don't want to lose it. I think it kind of comes around from time to time, hopefully,
It
comes
does.
and
Well,
goes.
when I think of what brought me further into more traditional stuff, were people like Michelle Shocked, and again, sort of that the punk and the alternative music of the late 80s. And then that, Michelle Shocked's recording of L&N Don't Stop Here Anymore, that made me go seek out Jean Ritchie's. And then her campfire tapes, that she was actually her debut. I mean, the songs that she was singing, again, country blues that she said came from her dad, again, through that whole transatlantic movement of black blues artists in the 50s, in the 40s and 50s, and the skiffle craze, and how that music kind of found its way into sort of people like my home as a kid,
Wow, I can't believe it's 7:45 already. This has been such a great discussion already. I have so many other questions, but and I maybe I'll ask one more, and also Tom and Oliver, please pipe in if you have a question. But then I think it's almost time maybe to go ahead and open things up. I do know we normally go until 8 o'clock, and I know some people have to leave right at 8 o'clock. We can go past 8 as well, but I want to be sure to get some audience questions in. I guess the final question that I wanted to ask is sort of coming off of this last discussion, which kind of started off with some questions and concerns about the crisis of venue right now in live music, and a lot of places have folded, and it's unclear whether certain venues are going to be able to come back, and we just don't know what's going to happen with live music after all of this hopefully ends, right? And yet at the same time, people are so hungry for live performance, right? And I'm sure those of you who attended on Saturday night were delighted to see just the hundreds of people that showed up for that event. And even though the performance situation was not ideal for any of the performers, everyone just did such a wonderful job at somehow projecting that person, that just regular person kind of personality that we all talk about with folk music. It was just, I felt like you were right there in front of me. So I guess that's a comment, but also a question, I suppose, for maybe for Peter as a concert promoter, but also for the musicians here who are performers. I'm wondering what you think the future might look like, given that, or do you think people are going to expect to be able to tune into great concerts online like this and therefore not go out, or maybe some kind of a hybrid situation? I'm just curious what you think about that.
Well, for every fine production, such as the one on Saturday night or last Wednesday on the Newport Jazz Festival website, I watched Christian McBride spend 2 hours talking about Chick Corea with a ton of great musicians. For every one of those, for every one of those, there's a lot of stuff that isn't cutting. I mean, the numbers are showing people aren't showing up to, a lot of these online shows right now. I mean, live is where it's at, obviously, and we can't do it right now. I mean, and I'm not discouraging anybody from doing it. I had to do an online 3 nights, 2 hours a night for Salmon Arm Roots and Blues last summer. We stitched that together. It wasn't easy. We got a pretty good response. It was a mixed bag of performances because we were using archival material from the main stage for going back as far as 10 years. I rented 3 studios, one on the coast, one here, one in Toronto, and had people do some brand new material for us. And then we had some produced videos from certain artists, with reasonably big budgets that they gave us. So it looked pretty good, sounded pretty good, but at the end of the day, it's not that immediacy you get and that connection. And folk festivals, folk festivals and folk clubs, I mean, they're about interacting with the people, not only on stage, but the people that you're sitting next to. You know, it's a community thing. Usually everybody who walks into a folk club such as Betty's, Joe's, and Bill's, I mean, half the people know the other half, you know, you just know 30 people in the room easy. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned where people are going to be at financially. Are they going to be able to afford things? I'm disturbed at the prices, of venues to rent. I mean, theaters are not cheap like they used to be, or reasonable. And I mean, God, I belonged to a couple of unions in my life, but I think there's some theaters that, shouldn't be IATSE theaters right now. I'll probably get slapped for that. It's tough. It's really tough. I mean, stringing, there used to be, when I say a place like the Hobble was open 30 nights, I mean, it's one thing to get a Friday and Saturday night gig. It's another thing when you're on the road, how do Linda can address this, filling up Tuesday and Wednesday and Monday. And I mean, it's a tough go. And there's also, it's a different world. There's a lot more people out there touring and trying to get their songs in front of people. I don't want to sound like a downer, but it's a lot of work these days. It's, trying to find your place. We're lucky to have a CKUA and a CJSR here, but trying to get X number of spins is tough, getting 20 spins a week means that people are actually hearing you. Getting 3 spins a week means not a lot of people are hearing you. So it's an interesting equation these days. I know I talk to my good friend and Linda's good friend, Doug Cox, a lot, and we talk about this stuff about what's the end game. And, but, people are still showing up, and Salmon Arm, I've been really excited. I've been told, I mean, I'm on my way out of that festival at the end of the year. And, some people have said I booked too traditional of a festival, and I don't know what the heck that means. It's roots and it's blues. But I'm seeing a lot of young people come the last couple of years, 3 or 4. So I think if you just keep pounding on it, it'll work. But it's not as, I don't think it's as easy as it was when I first started promoting shows in 1976 or whatever it was. You got to be passionate. I mean, you're not in this for, passion is the key. And I'm lucky to say I still have it. I love it.
Indeed, yeah, it's something we've thought about a lot about at the university too, because the side effect of COVID has actually for those of like running institutes or putting on concerts in which we're hoping to bring in the community and sort of bring the work outside of the university. It's been a boon to us to be able to reach more people, and so I think a lot about this from the point of view of university, but I also think about it just in terms of just local communities and cultures that exist like this, and so I'm just really interested to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, well, actually, okay, so we're at 7:52. So what I'd like to do now is open it up. I do see that the chat has already been quite active. There's been a question about a dumplings recipe, but and just some good comments. But if you'd like to ask a question of any of the panelists, or I'll dare to say, even those who performed who aren't on the panel could certainly be asked a question if you would like to answer a question. I see Terry and Shauna and who else am I seeing here? Scrolling up, and Betty Jo and Bill are here. And so anyone who'd like to ask a question, we'll look at the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. And so please speak up if you'd like to ask a question.
So while people are thinking, maybe I'll ask my question, because it's essentially, we bridged towards it when we talked about reaching other audiences and passing the baton to next generations. And for me, a lot of my involvement is about stewardship, like the stewardship of the Asch collection, keeping it available, bridging from university to community. So I'm just so curious, and I heard some really great ideas already, but what can we do to help keep the doors open and keep the bridge from the Asch collection and the sound studies team to the community? As musicians and as organizers, do you have some suggestions?
Well, I think it's great that it's now the regular concert every year, Women of Folkways at the Northern Lights Folk Club. And thanks so much to Betty, Joe, and Bill for taking that on each year, because I think that, you know, that gives an audience in a particular schedule, and it's in the community, so it connects the university to becoming aware of the Northern Lights Folk Club. And I think all of that is really important to build and keep an audience for the music. Obviously this year you couldn't really have programming at the university, but in former days, like when Peter had the whole festival at the university, that was such a cool idea. I just think it would have taken several more years to really root it there so that students and the student body and all of the faculty knew that it was a regular thing. But I love that idea of some of those early years where Peter actually booked some of the festival participants in the student union building at lunch hour. So getting to that idea of folks who might never otherwise think of folk music, they're hearing it while they're getting their lunch or their coffee break on campus. So it would be really cool if some of that could happen again as well. But I think, you know, for Women of Folkways, for the now time being at Northern Lights Folk Club, it's a wonderful home for that. And Bill and Betty Joe are wonderful hosts, and their crew of volunteers.
What I think, you know, would be nice is if, and it's, you know, it's always the legwork, but it'd be nice if this came together again, you know, when Women of Folkways, and it did 5 or 6 dates in the province. You know, just I never did it, but it's like going out and knocking on doors and seeing if, you know, the Bailey Theatre in Camrose and a folk. You've done that, Bill? Have you tried to pitch it?
I know that Dana and I wanted to run away with Joan Besson the year that she was here. I mean, honestly, it's like we were born to make music together. You know, we sang the first notes we sang together when we were figuring out harmonies, just everything just felt so wonderful. And Joan is just such a monster piano player and singer and songwriter. And I know we were all fired up to take the show on a world tour, but you know, that takes a lot of legwork to do. But given the fact that in terms of the environment, and then also we're, you know, learning the toll that travel's taking, if we are bringing artists from Newfoundland, from Toronto, from down in the States, it would be wonderful to put together a tour so that they could be here for a whole week if they're making that flight when that's possible again. You know, that it's you're making the most of that carbon emissions.
We have talked to a couple of the other clubs in Calgary, and of course we're always trying to book shows in conjunction with their concert nights as well. You know, with the Nickelodeon, with the Fish Creek concerts, Calgary Folk Club, etc. And of course, there are lots of others around the province. I think people had a hard time understanding what the concept was anytime we've tried to have a conversation. Now that we've got this archived, I think we've got something that we could move forward. You know, it's like you said, Peter, it's going to take some legwork. I'd be willing to do some of that legwork. You know, as they say, you know, it's a lot of work, but there's no money in it, so that makes it worthwhile. You know, so So yeah, because I think it's really important, and Peter and I and Doug Cox and I and Roddy Campbell and I have had this conversation about, getting younger people involved in this thing that we do, whether it be the Women of Folkways or folk music in general. And, Linda, you said it, and other people I've heard say it, we didn't get our start in folk music. I was a drummer in a rock and roll band. I was, covering Alice Cooper and all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. So, but eventually I grew up and I became a folkie. and I think a lot of that's going to continue to happen. And I think, we see the people like Braden Gates and Ken Stead and the younger generation come up. And I think there's going to be, there's going to be that continuance is going to carry on. But I think to bring it closer to this, I think this is something that could be sold. Linda, I see your suggestion there about pitching it to Terry at the Folk Festival. I think it's a great idea. The nice thing about doing it as part of the season is when the performers are coming. Like we've talked already this week about the idea of having the 6 performers that were there on Saturday night to come back to the Folk Club next year when we're able to do this, and be great to replay that live. Wouldn't it be great if, while those people are all gathered in Alberta, that we could go to Camrose, we could go to Canmore, we could go to Grand Prairie, we could and take the show on the road, as they say. And I think that's a great way to help that legacy live on. And I'd be willing to work with anybody that's on these 2 screens of people to help move that forward. As Betty Jo will tell you, I'm not the guy that does all the organizational details, but I'm a good salesman. I'm a good pitcher, and I'll go to town with that.
I think it was 4 years ago we did Women of Folkways at Salmon Arm Roots and Blues. Maria was there with Shannon and Jeremiah, and Dana was there, and Kaya Cater. And I don't know if there's and as I recall, we had a great crowd.
Yeah. Asani as well.
Oh yeah.
Asani and I can picture her face, the wonderful fiddle player, step dancer.
Yeah.
April Birch.
Yes, April. Of course, April.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy lineup.
Yeah, that was really fun. And, everyone was very much in the spirit, very generous with, giving some of idea of what they were thinking of doing ahead of time so that we could do a little bit of stuff together. That sort of planned spontaneity that works so well. And, that was a wonderful experience. That was really great. And, it's the whole model that it is now, which I think very much Peter and Lorna, that seemed like your vision from the very beginning with Cat Dancer that first year, was that idea of having that sort of a folk festival singer in the round where you are collaborating a little bit with each other, adding harmonies, picking songs, a traditional song that everyone knows the chorus to, that everyone can really sing along to. And so I think that has been part of the Women of Folkways from the very beginning. And, I took that from that, what was set that first year, very much took that model and thought of it as, what can we do ahead of time to, trade and collaborate a little bit so that we have a rehearsal or 2, and then we put the show on and everyone is involved and it's this wonderful exchange. And Dana, in taking this over as well as host, has very much followed that as well. And so I think it is something really special that is very much comes from the folk festival model and the folk fest we have here in Edmonton and the spirit of Mitch Podolak. And it's definitely something that's well worth cherishing and taking forward.
I think also, taking this connection to the Folkways collection, on the road, as it were, and taking, doing it in Salmon Arm, and is, could well be extremely valuable for again, keep, trying to find a way to keep this folk thing going to subsequent generations, because it's like so rich and so varied, and like it's, anyone who kind of finds out about the Folkways collection who didn't know about it before, and that has happened so much since the Women of Folkways concert has been happening annually. I think, so many more people in Edmonton know about the Folkways collection and about Edmonton's connection to it than did before. And, if that goes outside of Edmonton, then it expands the knowledge of it. And that just creates potential for kids to have a place to dive into and find whatever kind of weird thing they're into, and then carry that forward.
So maybe we need an under 30s Women of Folkways one of these years.
That's a really great idea. I'm so happy to hear the commitment to this event continuing and to living on, and it's inspiring. And I certainly, as the director of this institute, I'm certainly committed to doing what I can to help keep this thing going. And in fact, it's funny, as I mentioned, I didn't mention it at the concert, but we had an event earlier this year celebrating Moses Asch's birthday. And we talked a lot about the fact that Moses Asch, of course, was interested in the label being more than just folk music and more than just any kind of music, but actually celebrating everything in the world about sound that can be recorded. That was his philosophy, and of course, the large bulk of the label is folk music, and it's great. But I keep having fantasies about, in addition to an annual Women of Folkways concert celebrating the great folk music, of having another event that celebrates all the other great women in folkways who've done things like, for example, the great women of electronic music of folkways. I think that would be super fun to do. Maybe a fall event followed by winter doing the folk event as usual. So those are some things I've been thinking about, and it's just been super inspiring to be part of this year. So I'm wary of the time is 8:06 now, and so I'm going to just quickly say we can keep chatting for a little while longer, but I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for coming tonight, and to say goodbye to those who have to leave. And I also want to mention that we do have another event on our lecture series coming up in 2 weeks. We're going to have Brian Photo who's a faculty member in music, who looks a lot at this. Some people here might actually be interested in this, sort of connects with some of the things we were talking about how musicians get their work out there today in the new digital climate. So he's going to be talking about his lecture is called "The Sound from Above and Below: Considering Independent Artist Perspectives in the Streaming Music Era." So I think this will be really interesting to hear. I know he's done a lot of work on copyright and how artists are paid to have their work streamed in various places. He did a lot of interesting work on satellite radio, but now he's looking a lot at streaming as a cultural studies kind of and sound studies perspective. So I hope some of you can come and see that. And that'll be at 7 o'clock on March 10th, Wednesday night as usual. And so thanks again, everyone, for coming. And I'll just keep it open for a few minutes longer if there's any other additional comments or questions. Anyone?
Hey, Scott. Just wanted to say that just to see when it was said about how Edmonton is getting immersed in this, the first couple of years that we did Folkways, it was a small audience, and we were okay with that. We knew that it was something very different and very unique. But the last 2 years, not including this one, but the last 2 years, we have sold the show out, and that's 230 people. So we've seen it change, and we now have people telling us that it's one of their favorite shows of the year. They look forward to it. When we have just booked our 2022-23 dates at the hall, and the first thing we do when we book those dates is block in the Women of Folkways show to make sure that we don't accidentally book a regular show in there and run it past you folks, right? and then just let it sit there. So it's far enough in advance that Bill, could talk to other clubs. But like he said, we've got something digital now that we can show them and let them see what this night looks like, which I think will help.
Great, that's fantastic. Yeah, so we'll keep talking.
I'm really hoping that everybody's just going to be so starved for live music when this whole thing is over that they're, I know so many people. I live just outside of Nashville, and people are just going nuts because there's so much music here, a lot of bluegrass and a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, and everybody's just really wants to go and see a band. I want to go see some live music, and like Peter was saying, like thank goodness we have. Could you imagine what it would be like if we didn't have this technology? I mean, my goodness, at least we're all able to communicate with each other and still hear music. But I think everybody's going to be so starved for the real deal when this is over. At least that's what I'm really hoping is going to happen,
I hope so too, and I think that's absolutely true. And in fact, it just speaks to some things I'm seeing in the chat. I'm sorry that I've neglected the chat. It's been actually quite busy. I hope you've been following it. But some folks in the chat have mentioned that Linda was asking again about the workshops where people can learn from the artists, which was discussed as something that sometimes is part of the events. It would be great to see that come back. And there was someone else. And maybe Tom, I know Tom, you saw some things in the chat too. If you see anything specific, please pipe up because I haven't been able to keep up with it all. But somebody else mentioned something a while up. I saw it go by about encouraging the younger artists who are making new music to be able to sort of have their music promoted alongside the Folkways artists in some way. And that makes me think about, I mean, I've thought for a while about a sound studies record label or something like that. That's probably a bit too ambitious, but yes, I would love to see a situation where young artists in Edmonton could have work featured right alongside and celebrated right along with these traditional artists that we celebrate in the Folkways collection. So lots of really great ideas here. Tom, did you want to
well, I'll just say
any of the comments that you've seen?
I'll say first that I know that Maria has to leave right away.
Yes.
So I wanted to say that, Maria, maybe you could just say goodbye and then we could wish you a happy rest of your night.
The sun has gone to bed and so must I. Actually, I'm going to my virtual showcase at Folk Alliance. So thank you all very much. It's a wonderful discussion. We could talk about all this stuff for hours and hours, but it's just wonderful to see and hear everyone's perspective. So thanks so much for having me. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Maria, for being here and for your fantastic performance on Saturday night. Thank you.
And then I also just wanted to read out Shauna Caspy's comment in the chat in case people hadn't seen it. Shauna, of course, performed on Saturday evening as well. Shauna said, "My internet's not great tonight, so I'll mention this in chat. I really appreciated the community that was created in the Women of Folkways show. I felt so welcomed, supported, and cared for. It was such a great opportunity to be introduced to a new audience and share songs with the other artists. I love the collaboration between U of A and an established folk club like Northern Lights. Alberta folk audiences and venues are like no other." And that seems, on point, true.
Good.
Yeah. That's very true. You folks are so lucky to have CKUA and everything there too. They're such huge supporters.
Yeah, and we're hoping to do much more collaborating with them in the future as well. They're a really great resource. That's a bluegrass band, right? Yeah, Blueberry Bluegrass.
You could go out with a piece of music that somebody picked.
Oh yeah, that would be a wonderful idea. Which one should I pick, do you think? I have my favorite one, but
Well, let's leave it to you then.
okay. Well, let me just share my screen. And I will take us out. I think what I'll do is Give me just a second here. Where's my list? Yeah. So before when we sent the interview questions, I also asked Peter if there might be a couple of tunes here and there that might be worth playing tonight. And one thing that he mentioned that I would actually just like to listen to right now is it's recorded on Folkways by Pete Seeger as she moves through the fair. The song is by Kara Luft, and it's actually He Moves Through the Fair. And I'd like to play her version of that, just a little bit of it going out. And we do have to be a little careful because it's YouTube, and I don't know if this is probably copywritten, but let's do it anyway. We'll see how much we can get away with, and we'll take it out with this tonight. So thanks everybody for coming, and you can listen to this. I'm going to play, you know what? I'm going to just play it right to the end. And if we get that part cut off, we'll say we're sorry to the copyright gods. So here we go. Thanks everybody. So I hope everybody sleeps well. And if I don't see you at the next lecture, we'll definitely see you next year at the next Women of Folkways. And I hope before that. So thanks everybody again. Go buy some albums by these great artists, and have a great night.
My love said to me, my mother